Hey everyone, welcome to the channel for another Escape From Tarkov video. In this one, I've got some new best-in-slot recoil builds for the M1A, SA58, and MPX that are possible thanks to a new attachment that was added in the 12.7 patch, the Mesa Tactical Hydraulic Buffer Tube. It's kind of an expensive part and locked behind Peacekeeper level 4, but it can be used as a nice addition to some already amazing weapon builds to bring the recoil down even further at the cost of a few ergonomics points. Unfortunately though, it doesn't work with the HK, M4A1, SR25, or RSAS, so it's just the M1A, SA58, and MPX that got any real improvement. The buffer tube can also technically be attached to some AKs, but it actually doesn't improve anything on the build, so I won't be covering that. In this video, I'll be going over these new best-in-slot builds and talking a little about whether I think the extra recoil reduction is worth it given the other alternatives. So with that intro out of the way, let's take a look at the new best-in-slot M1A recoil build, which I think is the best use of this new buffer tube that I've found so far. The M1A was already one of the strongest meta level recoil setups in the game before this new buffer tube was added, so it's kinda crazy to me that it's now received another upgrade to get even lower recoil, putting it almost on par with an M4 in terms of recoil, but firing a much more powerful ammo type. While it does have the disadvantage of a slower fire rate and no full auto mode, the M1A is still undoubtedly one of the strongest weapons in the game when built correctly, and this build makes it even easier to spam left click and keep your shots on target even at long range. To start the build off, I just buy an M1A receiver and the extended 22-inch barrel from Mechanic level 3 for about 58,000 rubles total, which is a pretty cheap way to get the base of a long-barreled M1A build. The first addition to this one is the Lantac A3 adapter, which allows you to also attach the Lantac blast mitigation device. These two parts go together with the Lantac Dragon compensator to get you best in slot recoil for 7.62 rifles, and this is the best in slot recoil setup on any weapon that it'll fit on. Next, add the Troy SAS chassis for the M1A, which can generally be found on the flea market for between 25 to 30,000 rubles. For the grip, I went with the RK2 foregrip from Skier level 4, giving you best in slot recoil stats and a small ergonomics penalty. Next up is the new attachment, the Mesa Tactical Hydraulic Buffer Tube, sold by Peacekeeper level 4 for around $130. It gives you a small ergonomics penalty, but also has better recoil stats compared to the advanced buffer tube, which was the previous best in slot part. The stock on this one is the HKE1 stock, giving you best in slot recoil and a small ergonomics bonus as well. The pistol grip on this one is the Hogue rubber grip, sold by Peacekeeper level 3 for pretty cheap. Sadly, the M1A has a pretty limited option for parts here, and this is the best one that's easily available. I've also added an X400 flashlight to this one, and you can add whatever light or laser you prefer as well. Finally, to finish the build off, I added a pair of MBUS iron sights for the extra ergonomics, which this build really needs, and then you basically just need an optic. On this setup, I'm running a hammer scope with a delta point reflex sight as the backup. This combo is pretty expensive at about 68,000 rubles total, but I find it to be the most useful scope in the game personally, and I use it all the time. For the overall stats on this one, it comes down to 37 points of recoil and around 55 ergonomics total, which I would say are some seriously amazing stats for an M1A. The recoil is extremely low, and because it's semi-auto, you can pace your shots to basically negate all recoil. The total price on this build is pretty high though, coming in at around 260,000 rubles total, though you can shave off quite a bit from that by using a less expensive optic. If you want to run this build suppressed, your best in slot option is the Daniel Defense Wave Muzzle Brake and Suppressor combination. This is a pretty expensive part, coming in at around 63,000 rubles total, but it also has the best recoil reduction of any suppressor currently in the game. With the suppressor added, the build comes out to 43 recoil and about 50 ergonomics for around 280,000 rubles total. Personally, I would say the M1A has the best new build out of all the weapons that can use this new buffer tube, since some of them have other options that are basically just as good, but cheaper or with less of a penalty to ergonomics, but I'll get into that in a few minutes. Next up for this video, I'll be taking a look at the SA58 using this new buffer tube to get the recoil lower on the meta build. I would say the SA58 is pretty much on par with the M1A in terms of overall power when built for low recoil, but it sacrifices some points from recoil and ergonomics in exchange for full auto spray capability, which can be a godsend when you're fighting in close quarters. The SA58 already got a buff to one of its own unique parts recently, which makes the new buffer tube somewhat of a less tempting choice, but I'll go ahead and show you this new best in slot recoil build anyways. First up, to start the build off, just get an SA58 off the flea market for around 50,000 rubles, which should already have the best in slot 21-inch barrel on it. Next, we're sticking with the same muzzle device setup from the last build. It starts with the Lantac A3 adapter, then the blast mitigation device, and finally the Lantac Dragon compensator. Next, the best in slot handguard for the SA58 is the CASV FAL handguard, sold by Mechanic Level 4, giving you best in slot stats on both recoil and ergonomics. You'll need special CASV rails from Mechanic Level 4 on this handguard, 5-inch rail for grips, and a 2-inch or 4-inch for tactical devices. The grip on this one is the Zenit RK2 foregrip again for the best in slot recoil stats that it gives you. I've also added an X400 flashlight to this build, and you can add whatever light or laser you prefer. To get the new buffer tube onto this build, you'll need the SA58 buffer tube adapter sold by Mechanic Level 2. Once you have this, head over to Peacekeeper Level 4 and get the new Mesa Tactical buffer tube, which should drop right into place. Next, I've got the same stock from the previous build, the HKE1 stock, for the best in slot recoil stats and a few points of ergonomics. The pistol grip on this one is the Fab AG FAL pistol grip, sold by Skier Level 4, which is very cheap for a best in slot grip. To get an optic onto the SA58, you'll need the Extreme Duty dust cover, which is sold by Mechanic Level 3 for around 12,000 rubles total. I went with the hammer scope and delta point reflex sight on this one again, but as I mentioned in the M1A build, it's quite expensive, so you can swap it out if you prefer. When it's all put together, this build comes out with 63 recoil and about 44 ergonomics total. Not quite as good as the M1A, but it still works very well and can let you go full auto without your aim hitting the ceiling. The price is again quite high though, at around 250,000 rubles total. You can save quite a lot by changing out the optic though, depending on which one you pick. If you want to run this suppressed, just like on the M1A, swap out the muzzle device for the Wave muzzle brake and suppressor. With this attached, the recoil is at 70 points and the ergonomics is around 40 points total. The only reason I say this new build is a bit less tempting on the SA58 is because it already has a unique stock that basically is just as good as the new setup without any ergonomics penalty added onto it. So while this new build is technically best in slot for recoil, you can save yourself about 20,000 rubles and gain a lot of ergonomics by switching to the SA58 BRS stock instead, which is only about 15,000 rubles on the flea market with 1% less recoil and a lot more ergonomics. Finally, the last build I want to show you in this video is more just for fun, because it doesn't really make sense to set this up on an MPX, but you can do it, and it's technically the new best in slot build for the MPX. I've always really liked using this SMG, and it's even better now that 9mm has seen a few buffs and a whole new AP ammo type. It shoots fast, it's very accurate, and has tons of different low recoil builds, plus it looks awesome, so all around I really dig the MPX. To start off, I grab an MPX from Peacekeeper through his dog tag trade at level 2, or on the market for about 40,000 rubles. Then add the 14-inch barrel sold by Peacekeeper Level 4 to get the build started. For the muzzle device, you can get the MPX carbine brake from Peacekeeper Level 3 for about $55, which is the best in slot muzzle device for the MPX by quite a few points of recoil. Next, the handguard on this one is the Lancer M-Lock handguard, sold by Mechanic Level 4, giving you best in slot stats all around. This one takes M-Lock rails, so you'll need a 4.1 and 2.5-inch rail for attachments. The foregrip is once again the RK2, purely to show you how low you can get the recoil on the MPX if you really wanted to. I've also added an X400 flashlight to this build, and you can add whatever light or laser you prefer. To get the new stock onto this build, you need the SIG retractable stock adapter from Peacekeeper Level 3, and then you can attach the Mesa Tactical buffer tube onto that. For the stock itself, on this build, I just went with the MFT BUS stock, since the MPX doesn't really need the extra ergonomics from the HK stock, and this will save you a couple thousand rubles. The pistol grip on this build is the Hera Arms HG15 grip, sold by Mechanic Level 4, and I also added a Geisley SCH charging handle for a little bit of extra ergonomics. Finally, the optic I went for here is just an EOTech hollow sight, usually around 15 to 20,000 rubles on the market. For the overall stats on this one, the recoil comes down to a staggering 19 points with around 55 ergonomics depending on the optic and magazine you choose. For the total cost on this setup, you're looking at around 170,000 rubles total, which is kind of expensive for a 9mm build, but it's seriously fun to use with that insanely low recoil, and to be honest, I think it might be one of the lowest recoil builds that you can make in the game. However, just like with the SA58, the MPX does have a much cheaper alternative for the stock, which can be seen as a better one, purely purely for the low cost. If you swap the stock out for the PMM ULSS stock sold by Peacekeeper level 3 for only around $59, you only gain 2 points of extra recoil while saving around 25,000 rubles off the total build. Like I said, it might not make sense to use the new buffer tube on the MPX, but you can, and the new best in slot recoil build is pretty fun, even if it is quite expensive. Well, that pretty much covers it for these new builds. It's interesting to see new alternatives for best in slot options being slowly added to the game, and I hope the video helps you decide whether it's worth it to upgrade to these new builds or stick with the previous best in slot setups. You're losing quite a bit of ergonomics for sometimes only a few points of recoil, but on the M1A especially, I think it's actually a nice upgrade if you really want to spam that left click. In any case, let me know what you think down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this new buffer tube attachment. I'll be streaming more Escape from Tarkov on Twitch, and I've got links to my Twitch channel, Twitter, Discord server, and Patreon page down below for anyone who's interested. Thanks for checking out the video. Feel free to leave any comments down below, and until next time, stay safe in Tarkov City.